Welcome to KidSketch. It's April, and we celebrate Earth Day on the 22nd. KidSketch is recognizing Earth Day by sketching something we find in nature, a tree. Did you know that Earth Day started in the United States back in 1970 to raise awareness of and to celebrate the planet's clean natural resources? Now more than 1 billion people in over 170 countries are involved in Earth Day activities, making it the largest secular civic event in the world. Sketching a tree will be our way of celebrating our world's natural resources. Well, trees come in many shapes and sizes and are so beneficial for the environment. They're beautiful to look at. They provide shade and cooling for us and homes for all sorts of animals. They help purify the air and reduce noise from traffic, all of which are good for our health and the planet's. So which tree are we sketching? There's a beautiful old tree on one of the main streets in La Jolla. This tree is Moreton Bay fig tree, and it's located in front of the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego at that three-way intersection on Prospect Street where Silverado and Draper meet. The tree is also known as an Australian banyan tree, as the tree is native to Eastern Australia. I learned from the La Jolla Historical Society that the tree was planted in the early 1900s by Ellen Browning Scripps for her beautiful home garden known as South Moulton Villa. She originally built her house and gardens in 1897, and it was rebuilt after a fire in 1915. We can see it was a fairly large tree in this photo. That was around the same time another Moreton Bay fig was planted, this one in Balboa Park in front of the Natural History Museum. Measuring more than 78 feet tall, it's considered one of the largest in North America. But getting back to our tree, the folks at the Museum of Contemporary Art just completed a major expansion project, and we can see that care was taken not to disturb the tree. New wings of the building were placed to give the tree ample room to keep growing, hopefully for another 100 years. In sketching architecture and buildings, it's important to follow a few rules in order to get it to look right. But a tree is a bit different. Trees are continually growing and changing, and a simple breeze will change the look of the tree. And so when sketching a tree, you needn't worry as much about accuracy per se, and more about the general character, the overall size and proportions, where the shadows are coming from to help define the tree. And like so many things we sketch, you want to start by identifying simple shapes, but the shapes of trees vary greatly. A pine tree is shaped like a cone, but these are 3 different pine trees with different branches, some that go up and some that go out and some that go down. These olive trees have branches going up, but are rather irregular in shape. A Dracaena Draco, known as a dragon tree, also has branches going up, and the leaves are very much like spikes. Fruit trees' branches go up and out, and their overall shape is kind of like an umbrella. And how about the lovely weeping willow? Their branches hang down, like in sheets. Let's look at our tree. It's made up of a bunch of circles and rectangles if we were to break it down into little shapes. When light hits the tree, those circles become abstract balls and the rectangles become cylinders. And think of the cylinders as like a bunch of straws and maybe those fun flexi straws.
Before we get started, I'd like to give you a few pointers about transforming a two-dimensional shape, like a circle or a rectangle, into a three-dimensional shape, like a ball or a rectangular prism. You can sketch along with me or just watch. I'm going to start with 3 circles that are more or less equal in size. And the first one, I'm going to make a simple shape. I'm going to make a quarter. You might see the ribbing on the sides of the coin. You might see it says Liberty, I think, at the top of a quarter, maybe the year, president's head. And maybe I'll give it a little bit of a shadow. If the light were hitting it just on the side, it would be a skinny shadow like that. If the light were in front, that shadow would be more or less like that. Okay. The next three-dimensional shape is going to be a cylinder like a soup can or a soda can. You'll see the end of it. You'll see the sides of it. And then to help also to give it a three-dimensional shape, I'll add some shadows. The light source, if the light source is up here, this area will be light. And as that can the sides of the can start to turn away, it'll get a little darker as it gets in shadow. And darkest the farthest away from the light source. There's our shadow. I would usually make the shadow, if I have lines showing like this, it's cross hatching, I'd make it look a little different than the can. But also, the shadow is going to be darkest closest to the object, and this is pretty subtle, but darkest most of all closest to the can there. Sometimes you might get a little light reflecting back up on the object. All right, there's our cylinder, three-dimensional shape. For this one, we'll make it an orb, like a ball. Same light source from here, and so this is going to be the lightest area. And then as we get farther away from the light source, it gets darker. If you were to find that center line of that ball, that'd be where it starts to get darker still. And then the shadow that's going to happen on the table where the ball is sitting helps to reinforce the fact that it's a ball. There, three-dimensional shape. Now let's do the same with some rectangles. We'll start with a rectangle here. I'll actually do three pairs of parallel lines, three rectangles. This first one, let's turn into a rectangular prism. We're going to keep it straight-sided. Think of it like a stick of butter. Shadows on the sides are going to be more or less uniform. And maybe I'll draw something that suggests that's the edge of the table. These next two, let's make them like the branches. Let's make them cylinders. So these are square-sided. I can turn these into round shapes. Would start off with the same parallel lines, but this one, make it a cylinder. So just like we did with that, it has a shadow side. And sometimes we can use lines like this to reinforce the roundness of the object. This is also useful for branches. Skinny cylinders are like our branches. A tree will have branches that are growing away from us, and a tree will have branches that are growing towards us. And so these lines are going to be very useful in showing what's going away from us. Shadows also help. If I make a shadow like this, it's not only saying that the object is round, but it's also saying the object isn't laying flat. The object is at an angle above the table. Crazy. The next thing will be this cylinder. And let's say this cylinder is a branch that's coming towards us. Those curved lines on the edge of the cylinder, the edge of the branch, really important the direction you take them in. If you make them go in this direction, it looks like the cylinder or branch is coming out toward you from the top. And you work on that shadow that's going around. The darker it is, the farther away that side is from you. And how about this for an interesting? You change the shadow again, and it suggests that the branch is going at another different angle. So those are just some useful hints that you can use to help your branches take shape and to help with when we create the leaves on the trees. We'll start by blocking out the shapes. As we look at the overall shape of the tree, let's find the big forms first. There's the big form of the foliage. It kind of looks like a kidney bean. It's a blob. It's like a big circle here, here, here that overlap. And then those rectangular forms that are the trunk. Let's start by making that sort of kidney bean, if you will. Circle, circle, and another circle overlapping. And that middle one's just a little bit higher. Keep your grip on your pencil loose. And I would encourage you not to make your blobs too big. Um, Otherwise, you'll be sketching forever. I'm working in one of these beep sketch books. That's equivalent of a piece of copier paper folded in half, and that helps me keep my sketches on the small side. You have your blob. About halfway here in the blob, make a little horizontal line, a little mark, and from there make a straight line down. We want to go just a little bit below the bottom of these circles and make another horizontal line. That's the beginning of our tree trunk. Let's add a few more shapes. If you look closely, that tree trunk, it's just the nature of this banyan tree. It's like there's a tree there with another tree there with another tree there. And actually, I think that's how these trees grow. So we can start with that middle trunk. We'll make some parallel lines, and then maybe this one, which sort of folds off in that direction, is this cool branch, which definitely takes off to the left there. We have this one angling off to the right. And then, my lines are a little scribbly and stuff, you can start to add some of these smaller branches. You see how they get smaller as they branch off? Great. And I think that's a good start for that. Then let's start to identify a little bit more shape up here. As we've identified, it looks like there's sort of a circle. And another one. You know, as you start to really study the foliage, you start to see the shapes. And we don't have to be so general. Like, for instance, this one looks like it's sort of got something out in front here, and another one like that. So we're just going to be doing a series of circles like this. This is interesting. See how much light this side is catching? We would take a circle and turn it into a ball, as we did in our little demonstration. But let's catch that one because it's really catching quite a bit of light. The other thing to notice at this point is that these sort of the 2/3 of the tree on the left, the leaves are very dense. This third portion, they're very lacy and feathery. So we will do the same as we've been doing, but keep in mind that we're going to treat it a little different when the time comes to start inking it. As a matter of fact, if you get the shape of it, you sort of see this part and this part and this part. So it's maybe like 3 circles. We see the branches through this portion more than, or we see the branches through this portion. We don't really see the branches in these 2 portions. So let's start adding some of these branches. This one comes down. We may not see it continuous. We can make some assumptions. We get to do whatever we want. As I mentioned, trees change from day to day just the way, because they're continually growing, because the wind is going to make them move, the light is going to hit them differently. So just however you'd like to branch some of these out, you can sketch what you see, you can sketch what you think you see. Is it starting to look a bit like a tree? The next thing let's do is identify where the ground is. Certainly there's the bottom of the tree itself, and there's the curb in front, so come down just a little bit from the bottom. That curb goes, let's just eyeball it, about to out there. This one goes out to about there. You know, a lot of times I'll say, let's check our proportions by using our pencil. So definitely the tree is wider than it is tall. It looks like the trunk of the tree, that line is about in the middle. So if that's where we have our trunk, could shape this up a little bit. Let's see if we've got anything to approximate height to width. Oh, sure, the top of the trunk from the ground up to there is about the same distance to the left. That's about where we have it. A little farther on the right, though. Quite a bit farther. So if we know how tall it is, we know that we want to expand. I think you get to take a lot of liberties with your trees. You can try to be accurate, or you can give it the character you want to give it. We're going to have the sidewalk out in front too. That's going to help us when we a little later when we start to fill things in. I don't think we should forget the egg. This isn't just an egg.
This art installation is part of the British artist Andy Goldworthy's vision called Three Cairns. Cairns are stone structures or markers that identify a place of great importance. Their dry stone construction represents an engineering feat as well as artistic creativity. Where are the other two cairns, you ask? For that, I encourage you to go visit the museum when you're there sketching the tree.
The three-dimensional shape, it's like an oval. An egg is like an oval, but not quite. An egg is always a little more pointy at one end than the other. So it's not really an oval, it's egg. So we give it its shape. We can't see the bottom of it because it's sitting in the ground like that. Kind of comes to a pointy top. You can work your shape. And then we give it some lines like this. The stone is showing us how it's turning. And then you'll probably ink more when you'll shade it more when you get the ink in. But our light source is from over here. So this is the side that's going to have the lightest lights. Take it off and give it some shadow around the side. So if it's farthest away from the light source, that's where it gets the most shadow. As it's curving around, there'll be medium tones in here and darker tones there. And see how your cairn has taken the shape that you want it to take. Now the last thing before we start inking is let's take a look at our subject again. Let's look back at the tree. And I'd like you to try to find the darkest darks and the lightest lights. So the lightest are the leaf areas here that is closest to the sun, that's being hit directly by the sun. There's some intermediate places here where they're in shadow, the light is filtering through, and that'll happen where things are starting to turn a bit. The darkest darks, our darkest shadows, are underneath here, and you can see that we can pick them out in this area here. So if we were to go back in and kind of remind ourselves, we'll just darken in some of those darkest darks. I'm just using lines like this, but I'm going to talk about lines in a little bit and the shape of our lines, the shape of our scribbles, because it's kind of all about scribbles. It really helps when you're sketching something like this to squint every now and then. Squint at the tree. That'll help you see where the darkest darks are and the lightest lights. And squint at your sketch and see if you're picking them up as well. Definitely the tree trunks are going to be quite dark, and that's going to give your sketch a lot of interest and a lot of drama. Is once we start to ink those in, and I'll show you more how to do it. I kind of don't want to do it in pencil because we'll spend all our time erasing the pencil lead, but we're going to get in there and give the sketch, give the tree a lot of dimension and a lot of character as we develop the sketch. So we've started with lines and shapes. And now we'll get to the inking, and we'll add In addition to the lines and shapes, we're going to add detail and then the shadows. Let's start our inking now. I've got my trusty pen. I'm going to suggest that we start with the trunk. Starting with that which we identified as sort of the center, and then you see how it goes off. I'm holding the pen, I'm not choking up on the pen even now, just like I hold the pencil sort of loosely. Because these are curvy lines and they don't need to be too exact, holding your pen loosely is advantageous. It's a good thing. Remember, the branches get smaller as they get higher up on the tree. When I'm not suggesting that we fill in everything about the trunk. We're really building this sketch up. So get some of your branches started, and then we're gonna come in and we're going to start on the leaves. A couple of things to notice as we start getting into the leaves is, even though I've shown us how to make a circle into a three-dimensional shape, these are actually, because they're made up of leaves, they're not made of a smooth surface balls. It's more like we're sketching fans than we're sketching balls. And you can see how darker in the middle of the fan and it gets lighter as it gets out. And it's a series of overlapping fans, at least as far as our sketching is concerned. That'll help us as we continue on. The other thing I want to talk about before we get started is we're basically going to scribble in the whole top of the tree, and there are so many different scribble marks that you can make. The leaves, the shape of the leaves, are going to give us a hint of how our scribbles can look. And by that I mean these leaves are rounded. So if our scribbles sort of rounded, it'll help give the character, the leaves of the tree, the proper look. If this were a pine tree, we'd probably want our scribbles to be more like that. And certainly if this was one of those dragon trees, our scribbles would be definitely like that. If it were a weeping willow, our scribbles would be like that. Okay, but we're going to be doing a series of little loops. I'm gonna try to use some consistency and not consistency. So 2 little scribbles, 8 little scribbles, some dots. We want to give them character and some definition in without really defining. Let's go back to our tree. I'd like you to make a line around the perimeter. It's a broken line, sort of little dancing marks, scribbles, dots, and that'll help us kind of define the ins and the outs around there. I do this as I look at the photo, I look at the tree, I look at my page, I look at the tree, I look at the page. And that it gives us the outer area. This side, when we get to the right side, we're going to treat it differently than the left side because because the leaves are so lacy. All right, let's go back in and start identifying some of these fans if we're going to be thinking of them as fans. So you might take some of the more identifiable ones. Let's take this area here, kind of turn it in a little on itself. Do you see any other? I guess you start identifying some of the fans and giving them a little shape. So in a way, we are identifying some of our circles. You can sketch it as you see it, or you can do a mixture of as you want to see it. This is where we can start to add some of our darker, some of the details. So in sketching trees, it's all about scribbles, and it's all about sort of organized scribbles. And if you treat it like a layered effect, that is, you add some detail, you add some shadow, but you don't want to finish any one area. You sort of work around the sketch and you bring it all up together. And then what's interesting about that is that again, if you run out of time, it's like, well, it's starting to look like a tree. You run out of time, you run out of patience, it happens. You can sort of see that where there's a light area, right behind it is going to be one of those darker areas. So what helps your lightest areas is having a darkest area next to it. I'm sort of defining, so I'm not adding anything to the lightest areas, I'm just putting something darker next to it. People who use watercolors will work all around an object and be careful not to add color to the areas that they want to remain white or look like they have a light on them. So keeping at it, playful lines, playful scribbles. Remember to squint as you're filling everything in. Just to check to see if you've got the lights and the darks working for you. Whole area in here that's dark. Why don't we take a moment now and start to add some of the shadow on the branches. And this is where you can decide those branches that are going away from you. You make the little in shapes. Find a branch that's coming towards you if you want to give it a try. Maybe this one here. Looks like it's coming toward us. This one's sort of coming off over here and sort of coming towards us. Most of these branches seem to be either going up or sideways. There aren't too many that are coming at us, so find another tree where you can do this experiment with. Speaking of adding some darker areas, this is where your sketch will look really cool if you start to do the tops of those branches where they're hitting the leaves dark. And then they get lighter as they come out. This is cool, the way the dappled light comes through the trees. So you can have some of your shadows on the branches like that, where there's an area that's dark and nothing then dark. And that gives the effect of that light filtering through. Some very interesting textures on this tree. So just a series of curvy lines to help define it. You could do a couple of lines around like this just to show that trunk is round and it curves. And you know, I think I had said earlier, it's like there's a series of trunks that all grew together, but that's just the way the tree works. And so if you wanted to identify the sections that are it's where the trunk makes up like it's another trunk. I'm ignoring the right side for a moment. I'm thinking I'd like to add some of the stuff that's on the ground. When sketching things in nature, I don't use too many straight lines. See how I'm breaking this up? It's a series of clumpy grass, but I need it to be darker because it's in shadow, like that. Though that part behind us isn't in shadow, so you can do a dashed line where the back of it is, and then don't start your shadows until it's a little closer to the tree. And we can take our cairn and add some of the stones that make up the cairn. There, add some bigger stones, some smaller, and then some random vertical lines between the horizontals because he's got some different pieces. And we really do, even though it's small, we see them. And then shading with ink, you just give some lines like that. You could also, another way to do shadow on this is just put in more of the little vertical lines where your shadow needs to be. There. And we have the curb out in front of the tree. See how there's some shadow on the face of that curb? So a series of lines like that, some close together, far apart, helps to enforce the shadow and that it's a vertical surface. And then on the sidewalk here, interesting shadow pattern, but just a definitely broken up series of horizontal lines to indicate the shadow. To the face of this curb out to the street. I don't know if you can see it, but the cracks in the sidewalk's kind of helpful. I don't want to get into perspective, but there's something to be said for making the cracks in the sidewalk follow the rules of perspective. So just make them radiate out like that. If you'd like, give a hint, just a subtle hint of the building beyond. We can sort of see that band. We see another band because there's a dark area that's glass. It's about right here. We don't want to tell anybody about the building. The building is just there as a backdrop. This is all about the tree. But sketching in just a few pointers about the building does tell us that this tree is sitting someplace not in the middle of nature. It's helping in an urban environment. It's cleaning the air. It's bringing shade to an urban center. And one of the reasons that it's not as big, it may be as old as the fig tree in Balboa Park, It's not as big because it's always had buildings around it that have limited its growth a bit. Usually, they say when these trees are around buildings, they'll grow a little taller than wider. All right, now I'm going to go back and maybe now is a good time. Once I get enough of a definition on the solid parts, then we can address um, this lacy side of the tree. Right. These are definitely blobby shapes. So I'm going to identify a few that I see, and then I'm going to connect them with maybe a few more branches. So we make a series of very open shapes. Tie them together with a few more branches. Definitely out in here. But there are leaves that are going to interfere with the branches, so try not to make branches that just go from one side to the next. They're definitely branches are peeking out through the leaves. And they're very thin when they're this far away from the trunk. So just in this area, we're going to use fewer lines. All right. So I'll go back and start filling in some of the areas. And then I wanted to show you, I had talked at one point about how it's a series of overlapping fans. If you want to, take some of those shadow areas and do a fan effect. They work with your scribbly curly lines, and then add a little sort of shape to the shadow. At the top of any of your fans, now you can add a few more squiggles. Definitely a dark area down in here. See how that starts to help? And it goes a lot faster. If this were like a cooking show, as I sketch all this stuff in, this would be the part of the cooking show where they put something in the oven and then take one out right away that's as if it has been cooking. Your hand might get tired. It's casualty of sketching something like this. I say it because yes, my hand is starting to get a little tired. There's something else I do sometimes. these outer areas where it's a little looser, I might make a couple of just loose lines like that that suggests, see, it's a full tree. There's a fullness there. I don't have to draw all of them. Pretty soon I'm going to pause and I'm going to erase the pencil lines because I feel like they are interfering a little bit with the finished product. And when I say interfering, there might be an area that needs more ink, but I don't realize I need more ink because the pencil's in the way. You can use a kneaded eraser or the eraser on the back of your pencil. A kneaded eraser is good if you haven't sketched the original in too hard. And see how the tree comes to life? I love this part when we take the pencil marks off and we see the ink lines that are left and the character that we've given it. As I said, you can tell those areas where you pushed a little harder with your pencil because that needs a better eraser than just a kneaded eraser. All right, now what? I think my sketch personally needs a little more of the darks in here and maybe a little more of the intermediate tones up here. But it's just about done. Definitely some darker areas here. While you continue to add more lines, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the cairn. And I'm quoting from one of the museum's websites.
The process of shaping and stacking the stones in a simple oval shape is challenging and intense. The form symbolizes fullness and ripeness, time and energy, loss and endurance.
Isn't it interesting how much symbolism is in that piece of art? There's something else that's sort of fun to do around the perimeter of your tree, and that is occasionally add a couple little dots as if they're leaves up there. So I'm just looking at the tree, looking at the sketch, looking at the tree. Something else it's just doing it over here is making the squiggles small, very small for the lacy part. I'm just now trying it, seeing how it works on mine. She might give it a try too. Did you notice I didn't put a border around the sketch at any point? I think I'll leave it off. The reason that I didn't put it on is because the sketch is all about the tree and not about anything around it. So I didn't need the border to tell me when to stop sketching. The edge of the tree told me that. And we don't want to forget before we finish our sketch to write at the bottom or somewhere on the sketch what the subject is, where you are, the date. So it's the Moreton Bay Fig Tree, Museum of Contemporary Art, San Diego, La Jolla, Earth Day, 2022. How did you do?